The members of the panel are Frank Appel, Deutsche Post DHL Group, Christoph Beier, GIZ, Christian Felber, Economy for the Common Good, Ylva Johansson, Swedish Minister for Employment and Integration, Gabriela Ramos, OECD. This panel is moderated by Andreas Kluth, Handelsblatt Global.
Okay. Yeah. What happened to my chair here?
You need to pull it up. There you are.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for getting us started. Thank you, Mr. Appel, for getting us started on an optimistic note, because I was afraid this was going to be all gloom and doom. And we basically also realized how simple it is. We all have to become like Sweden. But we can really stop there. But let's go around and collect some impressions on the 4 keynotes about inclusive growth we've heard already. Christoph Beier, would you like to, you've had some experience in Indonesia. You work for the German government, basically agency that deals with cooperation internationally. What ideas did that give you?
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I really start with the optimistic view, because I liked it as well, and I totally agree that there are a lot of progress we have seen, especially if it comes to the achievement of the MDGs. But the issue or the question, if we are living already in a world of inclusive growth, I would doubt a little bit, because of 2 things, 2 dimensions. First dimension, if you have a look, and Gabriela Ramos told us about this, if you have a look on how many people do have access in the developing world and in emerging economies, access to basic services, health, clean water, education, of course, you mentioned this, infrastructure, energy, digital opportunities. We have still a huge problem where we have to go, but I think you agree about this, and you mentioned what you are doing. But if we have a look on the issue of inequality, we see that 75% of the population living in developing countries and emerging economies are living in societies which are more unequal than they had been before, 25 years before. So this is not so surprising, I think, for economists, as we know that with a certain growth rate or dynamic, there's also an increased inequality inside of societies. We know this. But the question is, of course, do we have to do something against it? And this, I think, I agree with all of the speakers. Yes, we have to do a lot. Because of the political dimension, Mr. Snower was mentioning it, and because of the economic dimension. And we know from the World Bank, we know from the IMF, we know from OECD, that inequality is really hampering, or is a hindrance for economic growth. So not all the potential of societies can be used. So I think there is a need to work on this issue of inequality. With models, and I like, of course, the Swedish model, with models like the Swedish one, meaning that a lot of countries have to invest in social security systems, which is not an easy task, which is very difficult if you try to design social security systems from scratch, knowing that in industry countries, this has a long history of shaping and reshaping social security systems. So, and in societies where participation of all interest groups are not guaranteed, it will be a terrific, difficult job to do this, especially because it has also something to do with sharing. People have to share their wealth, and this will become difficult in a lot of countries, as we know. And the second comment I would like to make is regarding digital economy. I liked also the explanations, and every speaker was mentioning that we are in a new world of digital economy. But I think that we have to go more in detail in thinking about how can we contribute that the countries I'm talking about, developing countries and emerging economies, can make better use of the opportunities on the one hand, and avoid really the dangers and really cope with the challenges of digital transformation on the other hand. I'm very much convinced, if you have a look also in industrialized countries, be it US or be it Europe, if you have a look there in what has been more substantial in contributing to job losses in a disruptive way, you will see that technological change is even more important than globalization is. I mean, of course, both dynamics are going hand in hand, but there is, in such a world of disruptive change, there will be also disruptive losses of jobs. And if governments are not thinking about how to deal with these challenges, then I'm sure that a huge part of the population will be left behind. Others make use of the opportunities, yes, but others will not. And this has, of course, also to do with education. This has to do with inclusiveness and
now, in the interest of time, so
yes,
we all get to interact a little bit. Christian Felber, one tension in my head that's developed in the panel so far is we basically have an optimistic view of a world that is growing but not inclusive enough, where the system has to be tweaked, or a more pessimistic view where we basically need a completely new model. You were going that way. Now, Christian Felber, you tell us a little bit about your common good movement. I think you're in the camp of we need a completely new model.
Well, a deep transformation, a great transformation. Thank you for inviting a civil society representative to this panel. I will try not to speak as fast as possible, but as clear as possible. And I would like to pick up Mr. Snower's main thesis that economic progress can become decoupled from social progress. And I would like to ask, how can this happen if the economy, whatever we understand by it, is supposed to be at the service of societies and the planet, of social and ecologically sustainable progress? And my answer is that this can only happen if the economy turns from a means into an end and becomes an end in itself, measuring progress in financial terms and in indicators that are not reliably linked to what we really want to achieve. These are financial indicators, and as we used to measure success alongside the goals and their achievement, this is a failure of method. Trying to measure success achievement according to the means and not according to the goal. This is ineffective, and it brings along a systemic misallocation of resources, of financial resources, because financial resources are not systematically used to achieve social and ecologically sustainable progress, but to create more more financial resources as an end in itself. This is a misallocation, and it's also a misallocation of creativity, because creativity is put by economic units and actors first and foremost to create financial resources and not social progress in the same way. And this is ineffective, and basic human needs keep unmet across the globe, as their satisfaction is not in the scorecards of investors, of business leaders, or signatories of trade agreements. So if you want to put economic activities like investments, corporations, trade, if they were consequently considered as means to foster socially and ecologically sustainable progress, this decoupling could not happen. So the question at stake is, how can we put the economy again at the service of society? I was asked to speak 6 minutes, so now I'm confused if you interrupt me after 1 minute and a half.
Carry on a bit, but I just want to make sure that the panel now get to respond to both of your ideas.
Sure, well, but it's difficult to get an indication to speak 6 minutes, and that's it. No response, no discussion, and you cut me after 1 minute and a half, and I haven't said what I want to say. So I would suggest just to stick to what we agreed on before, and otherwise I can't even introduce to the economy for the common good.
Go ahead,
please. So, well, then the solution is to measure directly, effectively, and holistically what we want to achieve. And this is the approach of the economy for the common good. Economy for the Common Good, which is a movement only 6 years old, tries to measure success on all levels of the economy alongside the goals and not the means. Starting with investments, a common good exam for every single investment. We have now founded the project Bank for the Common Good in Austria, which is doing the ethical risk assessment before the financial risk assessment. Only if the ethical risk assessment is passed, only then we do the financial risk assessment. Companies do a common good balance sheet, and in which they measure and show what they contribute to social progress and the common good. And only if they do not diminish social progress, only then they can be viable in the future. And of course, instead of GDP, we propose a common good product, which is something similar to the Better Life Index, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Gross National Happiness, with the only difference that it will be composed democratically by the sovereign citizens. And under these conditions, only such activities that make a society more inclusive, more cohesive, more solidary, and less unequal will be viable in the future, because the economy would be put consequently at the service of our social and democratic goals. So far, 400 companies have done their common good balance sheet, and Deutsche Post was in a workshop, but then they did not continue, just because you're at the table. But with this, I want to say those 400 companies are small and medium companies, but also major ones have tasted a bit of the cake already. And they measure working conditions, the ecological footprint, the contribution to democracy, and of course, inequality. Now, this is the main point. We don't only measure if minimum wages are paid in countries where minimum wages don't exist, or at least living wages, but we also measure the ratio between the highest and the lowest incomes. And for small companies, we propose a highest possible ratio of 1:3, and for the bigger companies of 1:12. There are studies around the world, like for instance from the Harvard Business School, that people, if you ask them, do you agree with inequality? They do. But the maximum inequality they would agree upon would be a factor 5 to 1 between their CEOs and themselves. And another more business-friendly study in Germany comes to the result of 1:19. Reality is in Switzerland 900 to 1, in Germany 6,000 to 1, the extremes, and in the US 360,000 fold, 360,000 to 1. In Switzerland, there was a referendum on factor 12 to 1. It was declined, but the odd thing was that only one proposal could be voted upon. And this is a poverty in solution creativity, because there was another proposal from Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, and he proposed factor 20. And some Swiss citizens voted against factor 12 because it was too high for them. They preferred factor 10 or factor 7. So our proposal is to vote on several factors, 7 and 10 and 12 and 15 and 20. And then I'm totally sure that factor 900 would not be the winner. It was the winner, although nobody voted for 900. So it's a lack of democratic procedure. In a sovereign democracy, we would introduce new procedures to come to more intelligent results. And if CEOs could earn only 7, 10, 12, 15, or 20 times of their employees, this might be an incentive of companies not become too big to fail. And this might be the end of dinosaurs in the world economy, as we talked yesterday. And this would not only diminish inequalities in income, but also of financial resources and political power. And I think the redistribution of political power from corporations to citizens, from legal persons to natural persons, towards a sovereign democracy is at stake. My last sentence, and then I'm done, and you will not ask me again, that's what I've been said. People are asking for a size limit for cooperation. They're asking for a global fusion control and antitrust authority. They're asking for a compulsory common good orientation for big companies and banks, and not only for voluntary CSR. And if governments and policymakers don't trust to limit inequality in income, property, inheritances, and the size of companies, we have developed very effective sovereign democratic procedures that could help out governments and parliaments if they don't have the trust to do these necessary tasks. Thank you for your...
Now, Mr. Appel, what you just heard a lot of ideas, and I didn't quite catch that. DHL, Deutsche Post, you considered joining this balance sheet, but then didn't. Can you enlighten us on your thinking there?
You know, I can't remember exactly the reason why we did that, but the normal reason is as long as there is no global standard, it's very difficult to follow one track. You know, there are different models, and we consider different models, and this model has not been the only model, and that's the reason why we said, let's look into that and have discussions. And when we figure out, of course, we report on many dimensions of responsibility as well, but different from financial accounting, there is no global standard yet, and you can't report for all dimensions. You will always find partners who say, but you have not chosen our indicator, but that's a reality as long as we have not, like IFRS in financial terms, you know, a global standard. If that happens, we definitely would report along these lines as well.
Mrs. Ramos, you heard a lot of ideas that responded to your keynote. What are your reactions now?
I actually agree. But the fact is that you put me as a pessimist. I'm not a pessimist, and not in this setting. I think that we are not lacking very interesting ways of addressing the challenges that we have. The only problem is that when you translate this to the G20, what happens? The problem is that we have been for 9 years with very endemic growth, as we know it. GDP per capita, GDP growth. And therefore, the people that sit around the table had that sense of urgency. They're not going to be re-engineering the way they take decisions. They were not going to be looking at multidimensional well-being of people. They're not going to be looking at the distributional impacts if you are still, as what the OECD has called, the low growth trap. But the point is that what we want to bring to the table, and I think is what we are discussing now, is that you can get growth going by being inclusive. This is the change in the mindset that we need to get. But to change that mindset, of course, you need to convince the finance ministers. The leaders are more into understanding the intricacies of these issues, but the finance ministers have their tools, have their means. Getting away from considering GDP as an end in itself, but only a mean, getting trade openness as a mean to an end, to really get into the well-being of people. And then you have another very difficult circumstances, which is the divergence in the G20 table. You have countries that have inequalities expressed in regional disparities. You have countries that are completely on informality and poverty, and you have countries that, of course, are more into the migration, into the gender. So they're very different circumstances, and the issue here is how do you bring all these very different countries to tackle the issue according to their national circumstances. And this is where it gets very more complicated. But I'm happy to see that the G20 presidency is putting responsibility, is putting resilience, is putting these issues of gender, migration, very concrete issues in which the G20 can address. So it's little by little, but I think we're making progress in terms of trying to change this mindset to say, well, it's just not working, so we might as well get some other ways of doing things, because if it doesn't work, why you do it the same way you have been doing it?
Now, Mr. Johansson, one sort of question I think we all have is why can't the rest of the world be Sweden? It I mean, it would be great if we could just buy a PC to every home, and then to do that with iPhones and other things. But Sweden is a very special case.
Yes, but of course we have a lot of challenges and problems in my country too. But I think that we have to focus on what we have in common. The different countries with different challenges, with different situations. But I think inclusive growth, we all know we have to work multi-dimensional. And that means there's a lot of stakeholders. Governments, companies, NGOs, unions. And the problem is that nobody has the opportunity to be a hero by taking initiatives, because what needs to be done is too big. And for example, the governments and ministers, we like to have initiatives that can go into a small press conference, that can go viral. That was what we like. That won't change the world. So we need to do bigger things together, and that's really the problem. The problem is also there's no one to blame if there's no initiative. So this is the same. So I think this is the background of the global deal. So even if different countries have very different situations, all countries are in a situation where we need to find a common ground for this kind of multidimensional working together with different stakeholders in a way that we can trust each other and that we can actually reach results in the long term. So this is the thing behind global deal, not that everybody should be like Sweden, but that we should find a way to work together with different stakeholders.
Well, let me just throw in one thought, and then, by the way, it's not true that no one comes back to you. You can respond to each other, and I think the audience gets involved now. But just the elephant in the room for me is, does a country have to have a small population that is very homogeneous for this to work?
I don't think so. Especially we have 20% of the population is foreign-born in Sweden, and we're growing 1% in population every year right now, according to refugees. So no, that's not true for Sweden at least.
Go ahead. I believe we are now also passing around the microphone.
Maybe.
But respond to each other.
Yeah, only just one comment. I mean, the one thing is how does the society looks like? The governance is extremely important, as you mentioned. And if I think on the countries we are working with, the issue is, do you have the governance that the interests you have mentioned, which are important in order to deal, in order to negotiate about what kind of inequality is acceptable in a certain society. This we do not have in a lot of countries. So interests are not well organized. There are no platforms of fair negotiation about what do we want. And I think inequality is exactly something which is in the core of national policy. And that's why we, for example, we try. It's like with sustainability, ecological sustainability, social sustainability are issues which where you need really to organize interest in a good form, where you provide platforms and then negotiate about it. And we try to support this at least.
I'm told time is over.
And funds.
I'm sorry for the slight confusion because there were various timers running down, and I thought you had your timer. Apparently we're not passing around the microphone, but we had this. Is this correct now? That would conclude this panel, and of course I hope the discussion continues. But thank you very much.
Thanks to you.